to Thriving in Business and Life. I'm Christopher Harding.
And this is Will Wilkinson. Welcome to the show. Well, as we left off in our last episode, Chris, you were telling us a really interesting story. And I wanted to get the end of it. This was about an alliance, some might call it an unholy alliance,
Yeah.
forming a coalition at work against the boss. And I know our listeners haven't really been able to sleep well since that ended because they've been waiting to find out how the story turned out. So give us the third act here.
Yeah, so, when I finally really started to realize that I was a significant source of the problem.
We have met the problem and he is us.
Right. I really started to re-examine how I'd helped create this drama between he and I. And one of the challenges is that I'd done such a good job of convincing others in the work environment that he was a difficult, boss and not somebody we should really cooperate with. That when I started turning it around, they started coming back to me going, "Hey, what's your problem? This guy's a jerk."
So you sold him really well.
I did. I sold them too well. So part of what I had to do was just fess up and go, "Guys, I'm sorry. What I did was I really got you involved in a story about him that is largely untrue."
Now let's pause there because our listeners, we want them to get value from these stories. What caused you to kind of wake up and realize that's what was going on and change your ways?
Well, as I shared in the last episode, I met someone on a plane who later became my coach, who was really somebody who helped me see that this was a pattern of behavior I had, getting into it with authority figures, often my boss. And so, as we, began to explore that together, one of the things he helped me see that, like we said, I was the source of the problem, really, that my boss, he was difficult. He had some challenges, but I was making it mean something far more than that.
I'd love, if you can, to bring us to that moment, because in my experience, it's like an aha moment. At some moment in time, I get it. Can you remember, what was the tipping point there?
Well, yeah, it was on the plane, as I described last time, and he shared with me, the question, have you had other people like this in your life who are difficult and so on? And I said, yes. And he said, and what do all those situations have in common?
You!
But I didn't get that at first. I actually said to him, they're difficult people. And he said, but different people, right? I said, yes. And he said, so who's the same? And it really suddenly dawned on me that lo and behold, this guy was just part of a pattern. And so, that awakening allowed me to be open to start to consider how I could change things. And the coalition I really had to work on was to begin to share with them my process. I was like, look, I realize this has been part of a pattern for me. And here's the story I've been making up, and I've convinced you all that this is reality.
Right.
And I don't think it's doing us any good.
Right.
So let's make up a new reality.
Now, did they come along with you on that?
Some of them were pretty ready to do that. Others had their own issues with him, so for them it was a little bit more of a struggle.
Yeah.
But with my coach's help, I started to be able to say, this doesn't have to turn out in a battle with us versus him. This can turn out in a way that we learn to deal with the difficult aspects of him more productively.
Right.
And let's figure out how to hold each other accountable. If you see me slipping back into my old mode, I need you all to catch me on it, and I'll do the same for you.
So our listeners are still hanging by their fingernails, wondering, how did this all turn out?
It turned out that he and I reached an arrangement where I sat down with him and said, look, here's basically I've been a problem for you, and I know it. And you've got good reason to have put me on probation. And so here's what I would like to do going forward. I'd like to, partner with you as a teammate, and here's the things I will do, here's the things I'll stop doing. And if you notice me slipping back, please let me know. He said, what would you like me to do different? Now, it was a little bit of a risk. I wasn't sure I wanted to, because I'm on probation, right? If I get too risky with that, maybe he decides the probation is over and I'm fired. But I offered a couple of things and told him some things he was doing that were making it challenging for me. And he said, well, look, you need to agree as well to pull me aside and let me know if I've slipped off course.
He sounds like quite a guy, actually.
Well, he was. It turned out that he was far more capable than I had given him credit for. And, as it turned out, he and I repaired the relationship, gradually rebuilt trust. And at one point in time, he was the person who really sponsored me in a very meaningful promotion that eventually led me into one of the senior positions I held in that company.
I love stories that have a happy ending.
Sometimes, as I say to people, and this is true, I eventually became a president and general manager of the company that nearly fired me.
Well, it's an amazing example of our theme, thriving versus surviving.
Yeah.
Because you were heading in one direction, and this fellow on the plane helped you see the reality you were creating, which put you in position to make a choice that led you in a different direction, which we call thriving.
Right. So if we look at it in that mode, at the end of every chapter in our book, we kind of have a table that shows different behaviors. Here's what surviving or survival behavior looks like. Here's what thriving behavior looks like. And surviving is an us versus them dynamic. It's where we create these
either-or situations.
Yeah.
I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. Right.
Yeah, and the thriving mentality is looking for ways to create win, win, win. Where not only do we create situations where you and I win together, but we also create a situation where people who are tangentially involved with us win. And so that was my first real example of learning the power of being able to create a story that was about thriving and doing it together versus a battle. So, Will, that leads me to a question for you, because I know you were involved in helping another organization with a battle they had going on. And it was a battle that really started in a way through gossip. And one of the things we talk about in the first chapter of our book is how gossip can actually poison a culture and really create a toxic environment. Tell us a little bit about that situation as much as you can. Obviously, we always maintain the
confidentiality is always a factor, right?
Yeah, we maintain that anonymity and confidentiality. Right. So tell us a little bit about what happened and how gossip poisoned the culture and how you helped them deal with it.
Well, it was a fascinating situation, as these always are. A small nonprofit, people doing good, very earnest people, good-hearted people. And the principle that immediately became apparent is the phrase, you see it when you believe it. And that's the opposite of what people usually think.
So tell us more about that. You see it when you believe it. What does that mean?
The usual idea is that you believe it when you see it. You see something and then it fortifies what you believe. But actually, in this case, a number of beliefs started to circulate, namely that the leader of this organization had done something wrong.
And this was kind of the gossip that was being passed around.
This is the gossip that began to get passed around. Oh, the leader has done something wrong. And there were a number of people who believed that. Now, as it turned out, there was no proof. These were just beliefs. But the beliefs were so strong that they fomented all this intrigue, and gossip started flying. Before you knew it, an alternate group sprang up. To replace the one that wasn't working anymore because the leader had gone off and was doing these bad things. None of it was true. And we actually had to we sat people down, we got in a circle, we talked to them, but the beliefs were so strong the gossip just kept flying.
As I recall, when you were walking through that situation, this was a full-on mutiny. that was started, that you actually brought in a forensic accountant
Yep.
and went through the details and literally proved black and white hard evidence that these stories that had been circulating were patently untrue.
Exactly.
And yet, if I remember correctly, there were some people who had bought into those stories so strongly that even in the face of hard evidence, they still had found it difficult to let go of the story.
Well, it's true, and it reminds me of a statement my dad had, and a lot of people use something like this. In response to this kind of debunking of gossip, they'll say, yeah, that's what they'd like you to believe. In other words, there's a conspiracy that includes getting an accountant to risk his career by lying, getting an attorney to risk his career by falsifying information. I mean, it's beyond the pale. But when someone believes something passionately, when their emotion is involved, and in this case, to be more disclosing, there were some power elements going on. There was an individual who really wanted to take over the group.
So this was a strategy.
It was a strategy. It was a dysfunctional sociopathic strategy that was involved in rolling other people in gossip to unseat the leader.
Wow. Well, I'm sure that's not the first time people have seen that or heard about that. It's unfortunately a common practice. And unfortunately in this case, because it sounds like the leader was actually doing their job, and the power play.
Well, they were, but what we learned was that the leader was not communicating the way they could have. And this is often the case. It's justifiable. You kind of go into protect mode. Like sports teams will go into prevent defense. They're leading. It's just happened in the Super Bowl.
Right.
Team is leading by a great amount, so they start going into prevent defense. They're just trying to run out the clock. That's what this leader was doing. She felt that if she could just hang in there until people really got the proof, she'd be fine. She needed to be much more of an active communicator, and she learned to do that, and that's what really sprang the thing in the end.
Well, it's that whole idea of gossip and poisoning a culture. One of the things, and you and I both use this tool that we do within cultures, is first of all really ask people to be accountable for the stories they're creating. That's the thing I had to learn in my situation. I had to realize that my gossip, my coalition creation about my boss, was my responsibility to undo if I was going to stand in integrity. And so there's a little method we've got called I've Got Your Back. And it would work like this. Let's say I hear somebody saying something about you. And rather than listen to it, even passively, and certainly instead of passing it on, what I would say was, whoa, hold on a second. Sounds like you've got an issue with Will. Have you talked to him about this?
Right.
And if they say no, I go, well, you know what? You really need to go talk to him. Yeah. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a no gossip zone.
Right. What a great technique. Yeah, just go directly to the source and be honest, transparent, and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes people will say, yes, I have talked to him, but it's still not resolved. And it'll be like, well, you know what? It sounds like you maybe need to talk with him some more. Could you use a third party? I'm happy to go with you to see if I can help you resolve this. So what happens is suddenly, I start helping them create a story about solving the dilemma as opposed to just living as a victim in it.
Well, and the question that I like to ask is this what I want?
Yeah, that's
I believe
a great question.
That's what your new friend on the plane asked you. Is this what you want? You want to get fired? Just keep going. You're going to get fired.
Yeah.
So I asked that in 2 stages because I'm kind of stubborn, and I bet there's a couple of listeners who also are stubborn. I'm betting just law of averages, So I asked the question, is this what I want? And to be honest, sometimes what comes up is, you're damn right, this is what I want. Because I'm in the story.
Right.
So then I ask it again, but I say, is this what I really want?
Yeah, that reminds me of a question you and I both use, too, is to say, if I was to project the future consequence of where this is heading into the future, am I sure I'd really want to own that outcome?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
it's a great technique, and our book is filled with the vision element, inviting readers to do exactly what you just said. It's easy. Use our imagination, project into the future, imagine where we'll be if we keep following the road we're on, and ask, how do I feel about that outcome? If
Right.
we do that, we may wake up and go, wait a minute, that's not really where I want to go. I don't want to go to Chicago. I want to go to San Francisco. Now would be the time to get on a different plane.
Yeah.
I always like that when the stewardess says, if you're not going to Chicago, now would be a good time to get off. And that's actually quite prophetic. If I don't want that result, if I
Yeah.
take the time to visit it in the future, I time travel out a week, a month, whatever, and I go, you know what? I don't really want to be there. Now is the time to make a change.
As you're sharing with that they didn't always used to make that announcement.
Right.
And I can remember one time I was traveling for a business I was running, and I was flying like from Philadelphia to Cleveland. And the plane had come in from somewhere else. And apparently a guy who was on that flight, it was an early flight. He just stayed asleep. And I sat next to him. Flight took off. And he finally woke up as we were landing in Cleveland. We're landing in Cleveland. and he wakes up as the flight attendant says, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cleveland, Ohio."
No.
And he goes, "What?" "Cleveland, Ohio."
And we're not casting any aspersions on Cleveland, Ohio, by the way.
No, it just isn't where he wanted to go.
Yeah.
He really was supposed to change planes in Philadelphia and fly on to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And so, it's...
Yeah, well, what a principle in here. I mean, there's that saying, if you don't change direction, you'll end up where you're headed.
Yeah.
And Einstein, one of his famous quotes was the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Right. Well, and it's funny because the other metaphor I got out of this experience with this poor guy sitting next to me was how often are we asleep in our seat in terms of realizing where we're really headed versus where we thought we were headed.
Well, exactly. And I think most of us have had that weird experience of waking up as we're driving and going, wait a minute, I'm like 10 blocks away from where I had the last recollection I was driving. Did I doze off or what? And I think that happens often throughout life. And you can actually go, wait a minute, where did that year go? Where did that 5 years go?
In the first chapter of our book, we talk about the whole power of trance, right? And that we're often entranced. We can be entranced by a variety of things. Sometimes television commercials, political campaigns, all kinds of things entrance us. And literally, there are some who suggest, scientists, that we are in some form of a trance most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah. I remember meeting a hypnotist in my 20s. I was kind of fascinated by hypnotism, and I asked him, I said, well, are there some people who can't be hypnotized? And he said, yeah, some people are a little tougher than others. He said, the ones that are the easiest to hypnotize are the ones who don't think they can be hypnotized. And I thought that's kind of interesting,
Wow. Yeah.
And you're right. We're always kind of entranced a little bit, sometimes a lot. Look at the world. We're surrounded by all these stimulations, all this, one screen after another. And, it's hard to kind of walk through all of that and not be in a trance.
Well, I guess the question is, do we realize what trance we're in? And if we realize we're in a trance of someone else's making, or I think it's a term you use in our book, suddenly realize that our subconscious has been running the show, with a bunch of really unconscious beliefs or stories that are no longer serving us. Do we have the willingness to snap out of it and begin to create a very intentional trance, you could say, or an intentional way of living, an intentional story that we're going to start acting out each day?
I want to celebrate the power of questions, because this isn't esoteric. This is really pretty simple. It's kind of life 101, which we never learned in school, by the way.
Right.
To stop and ask questions, simply like, well, what's going on? Is this what I want to have going on? I mean, it's like we can change channels. If we don't like what we're seeing, click, we're on another channel. But often we don't feel as empowered as far as our lives go. How long do people stay in marriages that are just hopelessly not working? How long does a person stay in a job that they hate? Well, there's economic constraints, there's family issues, children, etc. Yet, if we get into self-inquiry, who was it who said the self-examined life isn't worth living?
Or the unexamined life.
The unexamined life isn't
Yeah.
worth living. If we really get into the habit of examining our lives regularly, not annually, but like
Right.
every day or two, saying, wait a minute, let's come to a stop here. I'm just going to pause and ask, how do I feel about what's going on with my marriage, with my job, with my family, etc., etc.? When I do that, I'll tell you, sometimes I get answers that I wasn't expecting.
Well, and it's curious too, because I think, asking the question of, is this going the way I want it to? Is there a different way I could show up in this situation that would change the outcome? A lot of times the job that I think I hate might be because I've fallen into a routine that's utterly taken the creativity out of it, the spontaneity out of it. Is there a way to exist in a situation in those times where maybe we don't have all the control we want, but we do get to decide how we're going to show up in that situation?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where, and we focus on this in our book, values are so important. What are our values?
Right.
One of the values that I found really valuable in my life is enthusiasm.
Right.
If I approach what I'm doing with enthusiasm, it's enjoyable. My wife and I live in the woods. We heat with wood. We don't have a furnace, so I chop wood. I split wood pretty much every day. I look forward to that with enthusiasm. And I have friends who say, oh my God, you must really be tired of doing that. How can you do that? Well, I'm a writer. I sit at a desk a lot. I love getting up and swinging the axe and splitting wood. So I approach that with enthusiasm. And by the way, I look at my wood pile and I feel rich and I feel proud that I did that.
Well, and that's so the thing I want to really bring out, that frame of reference you've created. You've
Right.
created the story context that says this is something fun. I love doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you go into it with enthusiasm because that's what you've elected to do.
Right.
Now, there's a piece toward the end of the first chapter of our book where we talk about sometimes the reason we don't change the story, sometimes the reason we don't make those important changes that we could, is that we have actually a story about change itself that's getting in the way.
Right.
Now that's something I know you come up against with some of your coaching clients where they're working through some personal challenges. What is it that you try to get them to see about change that might change how they see change?
Well, that's a pretty provocative question, Chris, which could go into a lot of layers. What's coming up for me, and this is not kind of my A-game rehearsed answer, is how important it is to be vulnerable. When we're looking at change, it's challenging. I don't care who we are. Change is challenging for everybody, especially some of these deeply rooted patterns,
Right.
where we've had something going in our life for a long time. So I want to champion the value of vulnerability. For us guys, this is something that can be very difficult. It doesn't seem strong. We seem weak. So with my clients, often I can't just go right there. Like, okay, here's a change. You need to quit smoking, lose weight, start exercising, treat your wife nicer. I look more at, well, what's the program underneath? Why would they be doing that when the result they're getting is really lousy? There's something they're clinging to, some kind of habit, a defense mechanism, and underneath that is some kind of profound vulnerability. And I just want to say that this is man to man. I mean, you and I are buddies here, and is something I appreciate in our friendship for everybody out there, but especially men. If we can learn how to support each other in our vulnerability, that's huge. And that can lead to the willingness to address change rather than just trying to attack the change head on.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, because otherwise what happens is the undercurrent of those unconscious programs basically set us up to sabotage ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, is starting to look at change itself as the fact that it's okay that it's going to be challenging. Right. It's okay that I might actually be, have some anticipation or anxiety about the change because it's different and I don't know what it's going to be like. Most of us typically, tend to find some comfort in doing things we know how to do well.
Right. And we get stuck in those, and we call those our comfort zones.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting. it really kind of brings back, and I think we've found this in just about every aspect of our work, is that we can't do change alone. Mm-hmm. And we can't even sometimes recognize how dysfunctional our story is alone. Mm-hmm. So even if it's just one other person in our life that we can partner up with to say, hey, let's conspire to support each other in being great, in being our best, in making necessary changes.
Exactly. Well, some of us have kind of studied Jung's work on the shadow and understand that we can't see our own.
Right.
I cannot see my shadow. I don't care how earnest I am. I don't care how smart I am. There's aspects of my behavior I'm not capable of seeing, especially the ones that hurt other people.
Yeah.
So that's where a good friend comes in who, we trust each other enough. He can say to me, Will, I'm seeing something in your behavior here you may not be seeing. Are you open to hear about it? And that can lead to some really positive change. I'm very saddened by hearing that a lot of men don't have a best friend that they can do that with.
Well, yeah, a truly best friend. I mean, I think there are a lot of men and women, as the studies show, who are very lonely because they don't really have anybody they can tell the truth to.
Yeah.
And so, whatever walk it is, I guess maybe the best way to find a best friend is to be one, to really start showing up for the people in our life that way, and invite them to call us on our stuff when need be, and invite them to encourage us and commend us and celebrate with us when we overcome a comfort zone.
Well, it's funny how, we're getting near the end of this podcast, and we're kind of circling back around to where we started with you meeting the stranger on the plane and him helping you. I think what he was exemplifying is the quality of a true friend.
Yes.
A true friend isn't a buddy who you drink beer with and get sloppy and casual. And, a true friend is someone who won't let you get away with being less than your absolute best.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, as you know, Will, this guy went on to become a great mentor of mine, dear friend, inspiration for this book in many ways. And, yeah, I can't even imagine where my life would be had I not sat next to somebody who had the moxie, the courage, and the commitment to say, hey, are you open for feedback?
Yeah.
Right.
What a gift to you and to me and to, people who are reading the book that came of this. And I'd like to challenge our listeners to be that kind of person for others. To be the kind of person sitting on a plane who engages with a stranger and ends up helping his life change into a different direction. All of us are surrounded by people all the time. And, our intention is to contribute to a thriving culture, whether it's in organizations or in personal life, families, whatever. And it really starts with this kind of initiative that I make the choice to thrive in my own life, and then I do whatever I can to help other people thrive.
Exactly. I mean, it's we're creating an ecosphere, so to speak. And so, as we're going forward, let's remind each other to tell upbeat stories about the people in our life and to really live out thriving stories.
Yeah. Well, I love your phrase, and you put it in the book, but I know you use it a lot with organizations. Let's catch each other doing something right.
Yeah, exactly.
What a great principle.
Well, so this week, go out. We offer the challenge to our listeners and see how many people you can catch doing things right, and see how many things you notice about yourself that you do right as well.
All right, so until next time, this is Will Wilkinson.
And this is Christopher Harding.
And it's Thriving in Business and in Life. So long.